victory.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Alhamdulillah, today is the 12th discourse, and inshallah today we will be covering declaration of prophethood. So we've been going at this for 3 months. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all istiqamah, steadfastness, to continue with these Seerah discourses. I know it's very beneficial for me because it gives me an excuse to open up 10-15 books and then summarize the entire thing and then come over here and deliver it in speech format. So it's very beneficial for me, lillahi alhamd. So last week we went over the difference between Nabi and Rasul, and we went over the various differences that we have heard or may have heard when we went to basic Islamic school. The most authentic opinion is that Nabi and Rasul, they're both sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of them are prophets. However, Nabi is that prophet that has been accepted by the people, and Rasul is that prophet who has not been accepted by their people. Some of the prophets, they were Nabi and Rasul. Right? So Musa alayhi salam, Nabi and Rasul. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, Nabi and Rasul. Because at one point in their lives, they were accepted, and another point they were not accepted. Right? Yahya alayhi salam, a prime example is Yahya alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. Both of them were cousins. Their mothers were sisters. So Yahya alayhi salam, he was accepted by the people. Thus, he was a Nabi. Isa alayhi salam was not accepted by his people. So he was a Rasul. Okay. We glossed over last week the types of da'wah. And people use the word when they speak about the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the invitation that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would use. So they say that the Prophet of Allah during the first years, this was a secret work, a secret initiative, a secret effort, a secret da'wah. However, to translate it as a secret da'wah, I don't think it's correct. It's better to say that it was more of a private da'wah. So it wasn't as if the Prophet ﷺ was purposefully, clandestinely giving people da'wah. This was the instruction of Allah that the da'wah needs to be private. So it was not secret, it was rather a more private da'wah. Because the rumors of this da'wah, it did reach Yemen. Right? And I mentioned the hadith last week where Amr ibn Abasa, he came to the Prophet ﷺ while he was in Makkah. So while the Prophet ﷺ was in Makkah, Amr ibn Abasa, he came. He was not an idolater. He didn't worship idols. And he realized that whatever the people of Yemen are doing, they are on the incorrect path. So he came to the Prophet ﷺ after he heard that such and such person has emerged in Makkah and he is inviting towards the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he came to visit the Prophet ﷺ and to accept Islam. But the Prophet of Allah told him that no, don't do this, you go back, come when I am victorious. So the Prophet ﷺ, once he migrated from Makkah to Medina, Amr ibn Abasa, he returned. And he accepted Islam in Medina. But in Makkah, because the da'wah was not yet open, it was not an open da'wah. The first years of da'wah, they were done in a way that was private, in a manner that was private. So the Prophet ﷺ told him that, look, don't accept Islam because your people are going to kill you. You're not in a position to accept Islam. And my people as well, they're going to kill you because you have nobody. You have no one. The Quraysh, this was a lawless society. The Quraysh, they're going to take up arms and they will just eliminate you. So the rumors of Rasulullah ﷺ's initiative, his effort, did reach places such as Yemen, that he is preaching this new theology. The Prophet ﷺ is preaching this new theology. And as I said, the Prophet of Allah instructed Amr that you return when I am victorious. Now this shows that the da'wah, it was known. It was known. People knew about the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, that he is inviting towards something very specific. He is inviting towards the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it is not yet in the public arena. It has not found its way in the public arena. It was private. So this da'wah was something that he was delivering to his immediate family members, who he felt and who he knew that they will accept Islam, and his friends. So it was not yet public, right, where he announced that I'm a prophet of Allah. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, during the first years, he never said to anybody that I am a prophet of Allah. This was the first 3 years. So this da'wah, right, this private da'wah, it encompassed the first 3 years while the Prophet of Allah was in Makkah. So first 3 years, the da'wah that the Prophet ﷺ would do, it was a very private da'wah. And because he was not yet public, there was no public opposition. So the first 3 years, there was no such thing as a public opposition. So the first 3 years of prophethood, the Prophet ﷺ, he was not preaching to the masses. He was not preaching to the Hujjaj. He was not preaching to the visitors who would come to Makkah. Right? And even his own relatives, right, who he thought wouldn't accept Islam, he was not preaching to them. So he didn't preach to Abu Lahab. He didn't preach to Abu Jahl. Such individuals were not approached by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's possible that they knew, because if somebody in Yemen knew, then it's very likely that his family members also knew. So people like Abu Lahab, Abu Jahl, they must have known that their nephew was preaching a new theology. But they were not interfering with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not interfering with them. He was not interfering with the status quo of Makkah. So everything is all good. Everything is fine and dandy. Whatever they were doing in Makkah, they were still doing. So the Prophet of Allah was not interfering with the status quo. So there was no public opposition for 3 years. Right? And why was this da'wah private? Why was this a private da'wah? There are many wisdoms as to why this da'wah was private. The number one wisdom is what? No confrontation. Nobody confronted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there was no confrontation between the Muslims, between the new converts and the Quraysh. There was no torture. There was no ridiculing. There's no mocking. Right? There's nothing that they have to really do, because there was no confrontation. So 3 years, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was concentrating on the Islamic teachings. So he was teaching the new converts about Islam. No persecution. They were not being persecuted. And we know that the types of persecution they had to encounter. We read about this in the books of hadith. We read about it in the books of Seerah, that they had to encounter severe forms of abuse, severe forms of persecution. How do you think they tolerated this kind of persecution? So severe. It was because that during this time, the Prophet of Allah was building them up. He gave them the spiritual boost, or rather he was giving them the spiritual boost to prepare for the hardships that were coming later on. And the hardships that came later on, these were severe hardships, and we're going to go through them. What they had to do, what they had to sacrifice for their deen, what they had to sacrifice for their Islam. And this shows that in some circumstances, it is permitted to give da'wah when there is a climate of fear, when there is a climate of tension. So if there's a climate of fear and tension, it is permitted to give da'wah in private. Right? History bears testament that when people went against, let's say, communism, what happened? When people went against communism, they were killed, right? We have in history many examples where people went against the status quo of a government. So ultimately, such people, they were killed because, well, they're interfering with the status quo. They're interfering with state ideologies. That these are the ideologies that we're going to follow, and nobody should interfere with it because, well, we know better. So these people, they were killed, whoever interfered. And Islam also doesn't compel us to do this. So if we're living in a country, in a situation where Islam is subjugated, where people are subjugated, then it's not obligatory that we go around and talk about the wahdaniyat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because there's a possibility that we're going to be killed. This happened actually when the caliphate fell in Turkey and when it became a secular state. So there were many things that were banned in Turkey. So the adhan was banned. The adhan, which was in Arabic up to that point, they made it Turkish. The Qur'ans were not permitted to be read in Arabic. So they were all translated into Turkish. All of the Qur'ans were translated into Turkish. The fez, the skull cap that we wear, that too was banned. The hijab was banned. And women, they were only allowed to go to official places in skirts. So Ataturk tried to Europeanize the entire Turkey. I mean, these are things that are mentioned in history. I'm not even making this up. But this was the reality that the Muslims of that generation, they were facing. And if they spoke out against this, they were imprisoned, jailed, killed. But yet, despite these hardships, there were many Muslims, while they're living in Turkey, they've lived in Turkey their entire lives, right? And all of the Muslims that were influential, they were kicked out. So the last Ottoman Shaykhul Islam, right? So the last Ottoman Shaykhul Islam, his name was Mustafa Sabri. Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, a very famous Ottoman Shaykhul Islam. So side by side with the Caliph, his advisor would be the Shaykhul Islam. So the Shaykhul Islam's, every Ottoman Sultan, every Ottoman Caliph, he always had a Shaykhul Islam. He was the Grand Mufti of the empire. So everything has to pass through the Shaykhul Islam. So he was a trained Mufti. Right? So what had happened was with Shaykhul Islam Mustafa Sabri, he was killed. He was not killed. He was told to leave the land. He was told to leave the land. That because you're an influential person, you have to leave. So he was kicked out of the country, and no Muslim country would give him asylum. No Muslim country gave Mustafa Sabri asylum. So he wrote a letter to Muslim countries that I am Mustafa Sabri. I was the previous Shaykhul Islam of the now defunct Ottoman Empire. If there is any Muslim that can take me in, then please do so. So no Muslim country would take him in. And then he received his visa from an Egyptian who was working in the consulate. So he said that the Egyptian who was working in the consulate, he said that if this was the Pope, then people would be clamoring, countries would be clamoring to take the Pope into their country. This is the Shaykhul Islam. So even though there's a possibility that I might get in trouble, I'm going to issue this person a visa. So he issued Sheikh Mustafa Sabri a visa, and Mustafa Sabri, with the rest of his life, he was in Egypt. He was kicked out. So it was a very difficult time for the people of Turkey. And up to a certain point, and this continued for decades, this situation where everything was secular, it continued through many decades. And people, they were going to madaris, they were attending madaris and learning about religion in a clandestine fashion. It was like underground. Everything was underground. So because people were compelled to go to primary schools, people were compelled to learn about Islam. So Ataturk's whole motive was distance the people of Turkey, distance the Muslims from their deen. So this is why Old Ottoman Turkish, it's all in Arabic. Old Ottoman Turkish is in Arabic. Today Turkish it's Latinized. And this is the case with many languages. So anytime a place, a region is colonized, then the first thing that they attack is their lifestyle, their culture, right? Their language. Why? To disconnect them from Islam. And this is precisely what happened. Look at, even in West Africa, same thing happened in West Africa, where the languages that were originally written in Arabic, they were no longer written in Arabic after the French colonized that region. So you have languages like Hausa, languages like Fulani, which are no longer written in Old Arabic. They're written in Latin. They're written in English. And this is because those regions were colonized by either the French, the British, the Russians. And this is what happens. This is the reality. So during these periods, during this time, it is permitted for Muslims to give private da'wah. One doesn't need to walk around with a, head on their shoulders that, I need to give da'wah to everybody and I need to get myself killed. This is what happens. A lot of people, they do things like this, or they do foolish things like this, where, it doesn't matter if I get killed, I should give da'wah to every single person, regardless of what kind of situation I put myself in. It doesn't make sense if a person goes into a pub and starts preaching about Islam, starts preaching about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a place where, people are alcoholics. It doesn't make sense. So there's a time and place for da'wah. There's a time and place when a person should invite others towards Islam. So Islam doesn't compel us. Islam doesn't compel us that we need to give da'wah in a public arena at all times. There is also something known as a private da'wah, which the Prophet ﷺ was delivering to his close friends, to his close family members. So he kept a low key. The Prophet of Allah ﷺ, he kept a low key, and there was no need to cause any kind of interference with the status quo. Also note that at this stage of nubuwah, at this stage, every convert, now I mentioned approximately 6 converts last week. Every convert becomes a mover and shaker in Islam. Abu Bakr, Ali, Zayd bin Haritha, Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Zubair bin Awwam. These are the who's who of Sahaba. These are the who's who of Sahaba. And the Sahaba were many. There's approximately more than 100,000 Sahaba. But the names that we have that are mentioned in the books, such as Al-Isaba fi Tamyiz al-Sahaba, right? This is a book written by Ibn Hajar, where he mentions the numbers of the Sahaba, and he mentions a brief biography of each Sahabi. Similarly, Ibn al-Athir al-Jazari, he has written a book called Usdul Ghaba, where he gives the number of the Sahaba. Ibn Abdul Barr, Hafidh al-Maghrib, he was a very great Andalusian scholar. He wrote Al-Isti'ab fi Ma'rifat al-Ashab. Al-Isti'ab fi Ma'rifat al-Ashab, Ibn Abdul Barr. So in there, he mentions the names of the Sahaba with their brief biographies. So you have approximately more than 100,000 Sahaba, but only about 5,000 names that we know of. Right? The bulk of the names of the Sahaba, they're unknown. So there are many regions in the world, there are many countries in the world today that if you were to go, the people of that locality, they will say that a Sahabi is buried over here. There's a Sahabi buried over here, but we don't know his name. We have no idea who he is, where he's from, but he was a Sahabi. And he was known to be a Sahabi. And there's only a handful that we have their entire life story. Because again, it goes back to nobody was recording their lives. Nobody was walking behind them, recording their lives. So whatever we have after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam emerged as a prophet. So the early converts, we know that they played a significant role in early Islam as well. Look at Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, Zayd bin Haritha, Khadijah al-Kubra radiallahu ta'ala anhu, Ali radiallahu anhu, Zubair ibn al-Awwam, Abdullah bin Mas'ud. These people played significant roles in early Islam. And we mentioned last week that the bulk of the converts, they were from the low class. There were few who were the elite. There were few who were from the elite. Right? Majority of them were from the low class. And this is a genuine reality that converts, they initially are from the low class. And this is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this in the Quran. And if we look at the hadith in Bukhari, Hiraqal the king of Rome, he asked Abu Sufyan. So this is the fifth hadith in Bukhari. So he asked Abu Sufyan about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that who are his followers? Who are his followers? So Abu Sufyan said that his followers are the low class people, but there are many people who are still converting. There are many people converting. So the followers of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam initially, they were the low class people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran in Surah Al-Hud says, وَمَا نَرَاكَ اتَّبَعَكَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ هُمْ أَرَاذِلُنَا بَادِي الرَّأْيِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is saying that the people of Hud alayhi salam, they were telling Hud alayhi salam that we don't see you being followed except by the lowliest people. The lowliest people are the ones who are following you. People who have no status in society. These are the people who are following you. Right? So, and then even the people of Musa alayhi salam, the Israelites of Musa alayhi salam, they were the lowest, they were downtrodden. They were in Egypt and they were downtrodden people. So they were the people who followed Musa alayhi salam. So the beginning is always those people who are from the lower class. But eventually, these people, they end up as the victors. The low class, they end up as the victors. And another ayah is وَأَوْرَثْنَا الْقَوْمَ الَّذِينَ كَانُوا يُسْتَضْعَفُونَ مَشَارِقَ الْأَرْضِ وَمَغَارِبَ الَّتِي بَارَكْنَا فِيهَا. That eventually what happens is that Banu Israel, right, they were downtrodden. They were the downtrodden people of society. The Coptic people, they would commit many atrocities against them, and we read about the different types of tortures that they had to undergo. So eventually, the Banu Israel, they inherited the earth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions وَأَوْرَثْنَا الْقَوْمَ الَّذِينَ كَانُوا يُسْتَضْعَفُونَ, that these people, they inherited the earth. They were considered as weak. They were considered as weak people. Right? Throughout the entire world, they were considered as weak people. But these are the people that inherited the earth. So now, while the Prophet ﷺ was delivering his message, this private da'wah that the Prophet of Allah was delivering, there is no authentic narration, but it seems that salah and wudu was something that was legislated at the time. So there was something that was called salah. Jibreel alayhi salam came and taught the Prophet ﷺ the prayer as well as the wudu. So these were voluntary prayers. These were not obligatory prayers. Isra was when the prayer became obligatory. Isra and Mi'raj was when the prayer became obligatory, but the Prophet of Allah was not taught prayer in Isra because the prayer was taught to the Prophet ﷺ by Jibreel. There was no need to, because the prayer was something that Jibreel alayhi salam already taught the Prophet ﷺ. The wudu was something that Jibreel alayhi salam taught the Prophet of Allah. So the early stages of Islam, the prayer was 2 rakat, as the hadith in Bukhari is mentioned by Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. So the hadith, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala mentions that when traveling, right, the prayer, it shortens to 2 rakats. And this was the original prayer. So when we travel, what do? The 4 rakat prayers, they become 2 rakats. So the Dhuhr, Asr, and the Isha prayer, instead of 4, we do 2. And this was the original prayer. And this is the hadith that is mentioned by Aisha radiallahu anha in Bukhari. Now there were stages of da'wah. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there are stages of da'wah that are mentioned by the scholars. And these stages are 5. We should try to commit them to memory. Each stage is a legitimate stage for the Muslim community in the world today according to their circumstances. So there were 5 stages of da'wah. There are 5 stages of da'wah, and each of these 5 are very relevant, and they can prove relevant to the Muslims throughout the entire world. So the first stage was the private da'wah. The first stage was the private da'wah. And this stage means that don't confront anybody. Don't bring this da'wah into the public forum where it's going to become confrontational, where you will have to confront people. You will have to answer questions of the people. Right? So this was the da'wah that the Prophet ﷺ was delivering. The first 3 years, this was a private da'wah to those people who the Prophet of Allah felt would accept Islam. And the judgment of the Prophet of Allah, it rung true, because whoever he delivered the message to, they accepted Islam. And as I said, the first converts, they became the movers and shakers of early Islamic history. The second stage was public da'wah, but with no military commands. The second stage is public da'wah, but no military commands. This was the majority of the Prophet ﷺ's life. That 10 or 11 years in Makkah, the Prophet of Allah was preaching, and there was no confrontation. You are not permitted to confront anybody or retaliate. So the bulk of the Prophet ﷺ's life in Makkah, it was spent in public da'wah, but there was no military command. Right? So preach with the tongue, but there is no confrontation. Even if they kill you, don't retaliate. Even if they kill you, do not retaliate. You have to bear with patience. And this went on for approximately 10 years. This was 10 years of Rasulullah's life in Makkah. Right? So you have 3 years. Right? The Prophet of Allah was in Makkah for 13 years. So the first 3 years, this was a private da'wah. The remainder is 10. So this was a public da'wah with no military command. So if you get killed during this time, then there is no retaliation. It is not permitted, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not sanctioned retaliation and military intervention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not sanctioned this. So of these 10 years in Makkah, after the 3, 6 or 7 of them were extremely hard. Multiple assassination attempts upon the life of the Prophet ﷺ. And the first years were very difficult. Right? These years in Makkah, they were very difficult. It led to what? Immigration to Habsha. The companions, they had to migrate all the way to Habsha. I believe there's a masjid in Somalia, and it's near the water. I read somewhere that this, it's port city. I read somewhere that this masjid, this too was known as Masjid Qiblatain. This too was known as Masjid Qiblatain. If somebody has a computer or a phone, just check Masjid Qiblatain. It's possible that because you have the original Qibla, which was Jerusalem. So I believe, Wallahu alam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but the Sahaba must have settled near that region to establish a masjid. So this is Masjid Qiblatain in Somalia. And I read this quite some time back. I never bothered to check it. But it's possible that they settled in that region, or they were living in that region, and while they were there, they established they established a small masjid, and the direction of the Qibla was towards Jerusalem, after which it was changed. Did you find it?
Yep.
It's there?
Yes, مسجد قبلتين يقع في المسجد مدينة وميناء زيلع التي تعقب شمال الصومال.
Subhanallah. Okay. MashaAllah. So it is, it's true then.
Yep.
Okay. So Brother Uthmani was saying, he mentioned in Arabic that the masjid, it's near a port city, near Zayla. So Zayla is a very famous region in Somalia. It's near the water. A very famous scholar, Hanafi scholar, he was a muhaddith. He was from Zayla, and he traveled for his studies from Zayla to Egypt. His name was Jamaluddin Zayla'i. He was a companion of Ibn Hajar's teacher, Iraqi, Allama Iraqi. So he studied in Egypt, and he was responsible for takhrij. What he did was, one of his greatest contributions to the Hanafi legal theory was that he established every point of law with hadith. So he was a very great scholar of hadith, Jamaluddin Zayla'i. But this is very interesting. I read that some time back. Wallahu alam, it's possible that they settled in that region and they established a small masjid over there. Let's continue on. So this preaching, the second stage of da'wah, this was a public da'wah with no military commands, and this was the bulk of the Prophet ﷺ's life while he was in Makkah. So you have to bear with patience. Whatever they do, whatever they say, you must bear it with patience. Now, as I said, the immigration to Habsha, the Prophet of Allah also went to Ta'if, seeking support from the people of Ta'if. This led to the year of sorrow, the boycott as well. This took place, the boycott against Banu Hashim. Inshallah, we're going to discuss this in depth in our coming discourses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq and grant us all steadfastness. The third stage of da'wah is with the tongue, along with physical fighting, physical exertion, to one group only, or a particular group. So this happened the first years after Hijrah, while the Prophet ﷺ was in Medina. So the Prophet of Allah fought the Quraysh. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sanctioned physical combat. So the battle of Badr, the battle of Uhud, right? And the battle of the ditch. Okay? These were military. This is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sanctioned military confrontation. Allah sanctioned military confrontation, and this was to a specific group, the Quraysh only, or those people who were fighting with the Quraysh. They were fighting alongside the Quraysh. The fourth stage is open da'wah to all with izzah. Right? With izzah. So that attack only when you need to in defense. Attack when you need to defend Islam, when you need to defend your city. And this happened after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. So one of the points that was mentioned in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah was, and this continued up to the conquest of Makkah. So one of the points that was mentioned in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, that there will be no active combat unless one group initiates. These were one of the points. So the fourth stage is open da'wah to all with izzah, and attack only when you need to defend. So this was one of the things that they agreed upon, the Prophet ﷺ and the people of Makkah. This was an open victory, and inshallah we're going to speak about this. This Hudaybiyah, when you look at it, it seems one-sided. Hudaybiyah, the Pact of Hudaybiyah, when you look at the agreement between the people of Makkah and the Prophet ﷺ, it was one-sided. It seemed to favor the people of Makkah, to such an extent that Umar radiallahu anh questioned that, Ya Rasulullah, are we not on haqq? Are we not this? Are we not that? Why are we doing this? We're in a position of strength. We're in a position of power. Why are we doing this? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verses, Inna fatahna laka fatham mubina, that this was an open victory. Why was it an open victory? Because this was the opportunity the Prophet ﷺ needed for the people of Makkah to witness what he created in Medina. This was an opportunity for them. So people came into Islam in droves, in multitudes. People accepted Islam because they got to witness what the Prophet of Allah established in Medina, the society that he created in Medina. And they wanted to be part of that society. They wanted to be part of this Islam. So this was a victory. The Sulh of Hudaybiyah, this was a victory. The Pact of Hudaybiyah was a victory. The fifth and final stage. This stage is open da'wah to all with physical confrontation to anyone who opposes Islam. Okay? So open da'wah to all with physical confrontation to anyone who opposes The Prophet ﷺ passed away before this was this was carried on, before this was followed through. And this stage, when he passed away, the Prophet of Allah was sending delegations, and he was sending armies and contingents, right, to different lands. And the Sahaba, they continued this effort and initiative. So the Sahaba, they continued this initiative. So you have Faris and you have Rum. Both of them were conquered in the generation of Umar radiallahu anhu. So you have the battle of Qadisiyah being fought, a very great battle that was fought. You have the battle against the Faris, battle of Faris, Persia being fought. This was fought against these battles were fought against the Romans and the people of Persia. And these regions were conquered in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu. So Syria, which was under Roman occupation, this came under Muslim rule. So Islam, it continued to spread. It continued to spread until it reached China. Right? So you have Islam reaching all the way to China, and then you have Islam reaching all the way to North Africa. You have all of these countries in between converting to Islam. Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan and Iran, and within the first 100 years, you have even Muhammad ibn al-Qasim coming into Sindh, Pakistan, all of these regions. So Muhammad ibn al-Qasim, he was the one who conquered Sindh, Pakistan, and as a result, people entered into the fold of Islam through Muhammad ibn al-Qasim. And this continued until everything went back to the fourth stage. So open da'wah to all with izzah, and attack only when you need to defend. So this final stage, it was open da'wah to all with physical confrontation, because the purpose and objective of Islam is to free people from the shackles of tyranny. Right? Free people from the shackles of tyranny. And this was what was happening in Rome as well as Persia. If you read, there's a book written by a very famous Indian scholar, ماذا خسر العالم بانحطاط المسلمين. ماذا خسر العالم بانحطاط المسلمين. So it's written by an Indian scholar by the name of Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi, very famous thinker and intellectual. When he passed away, I think he passed away in 99, and the people of Makkah, they performed a janazah for him, although his body was not present there. So they had great respect for Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi. He was a master linguist in the Arabic language, and this book is written in Arabic. And he was an amazing linguist, very fasih in the Arabic language. It's been translated, ماذا خسر العالم بانحطاط المسلمين, what the world lost by the downfall of the Muslims. So it has been translated into English. I think it's translated in Urdu as well, if I'm not mistaken. So, but the original book was written in Arabic by Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi, very famous scholar. And in there he discusses how the people of Persia, they were suffering under the tyranny of their rulers. How the people of Rome, they were suffering under the tyranny of their rulers. So Islam, the objective of Islam isn't forceful conversion. The objective of Islam is to make sure that justice is applied to every person equally. That what happens when a person, you have in many countries, that the leaders of that country, right? The leaders of that country, when they apply the laws, they apply the laws to the downtrodden, people who don't have any status of society, right? And this is the case over here in this country as well, where the laws apply to those people who can't protect themselves. And those people who are in a position of influence, rarely does the law apply to them, right? And sometimes when they are jailed, they go from a 5-star hotel to a 7-star hotel when they're ultimately jailed. We see that today, even now, because these people are in a position of influence, and it's difficult to really wrap the law around them, because if you do, then there's a possibility that they could do something to make your life difficult, or they will do something to cause an economic downturn. And so there are many reasons as to why Islam, it flourished, it spread, because people, they were downtrodden, they didn't want that anymore. And nobody wants that. Everybody wants equal footing. And the Islamic law, it applied to everyone equally, whether you were the elite, whether you were downtrodden, it didn't matter. There was no such thing. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions this to Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, that, or rather he mentioned this about Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, when one of the Sahabi came to the Prophet and said, Ya Rasulullah, this is an honorable woman, she committed theft, so perhaps we shouldn't apply the had on her. The capital punishment should not apply to her. So, and they sent none other than Usama bin Zayd, who was the most beloved to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the Prophet of Allah remarked that even you, O Usama, and then he said that if Fatima bint Muhammad committed theft, then I would chop off her hand. I would chop off her hand. The law of Islam is equally applicable to each and every single individual, regardless of status, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you came from, regardless of ethnicity. Regardless of ethnicity, it doesn't matter. It is applicable to each and every single person. So this continued until everything went back to the fourth stage. Now we have military conquest. It's not part of Islam, but it's a possible part. I want to mention this, that military conquest is not part of Islam, but it is a possible part. It's used when the ummah needed it to be used. This is when military conquest is used. And those who preach this today, that there should be military conquest and we should just take over the entire world, these people are wrong and they're out of their minds and delusional. Right? So you have people who are a minority in a country like Britain, right, where they're just talking about establishing the Khilafah. Are you crazy? You're delusional? What world are you living in? How are you going to establish the Khilafah? Where is the command that you have to establish the Khilafah where you are a minority? This is just ridiculous and it's absurd and very impractical. But you have such people like that, where they just they get confrontational and they say such things which are just absurd. And then what happens is this results in people just despising Islam, hating Islam. Now, this open preaching, it began. So this private da'wah, it continued for 3 years. And open preaching, this began after 3 years, after Surah Al-Alaq was revealed. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed verses to this effect that now this private preaching can no longer be private. Now it needs to come out into the open. So there are two important verses. One is from Surah Al-Hijr. فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ وَأَعْرِضْ عَنِ الْجَاهِلِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is commanding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that proclaim openly what has been commanded. Proclaim openly what has been commanded. فَاصْدَعْ بِمَا تُؤْمَرْ. Proclaim openly. Whatever you have been taught by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, proclaim it openly. The second, وَأَنذِرْ عَشِيرَتَكَ الْأَقْرَبِينَ. This is from Surah Al-Shu'ara. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse is mentioning that warn your family. Warn the Quraysh, because the Quraysh, they were all his family. They were all distant relatives. So the Quraysh were his ashira, they were his family. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it appears that he did this in 2 stages. Okay? So first, he went to Banu Hashim and Banu Abd Munaf, and he told Ali radiallahu anh that prepare some broth and soup to them. And there was only 1 leg of lamb, and 40 of the Quraysh, they came. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this was very less food. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he blessed it. And even though they were 40, all of them ate their fill. And it was as if they ate the entire plate themselves. This was one of the first miracles of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the soup and the broth that was prepared, they drank it as if this soup and broth was prepared just for that one person. So everybody, they drank from that soup and broth. And they all ate to their fill. Now Abu Lahab, so this was a very awe-inspiring gathering. So Abu Lahab, he sent something. And so he feared that whatever his nephew was doing in private, that he will now make it public. So Abu Lahab, he noticed there was an aura in this gathering. So he noticed that something strange is about to happen. Something very peculiar is about to happen. So he stands before everybody finishes eating. He gives an excuse and he goes home. So this was the tactic of Abu Lahab. The Prophet ﷺ saw this and he understood. Now then he tells everybody, then they left that gathering. He tells Ali radiallahu anh again that prepare some food. Ali radiallahu anh was living with the Prophet ﷺ. So he tells Ali radiallahu anh that make the dish again. Make the food again. So this time, before they could stand, present any excuses, the Prophet ﷺ stood and he began preaching. He began preaching. And he gave the khutbatul haja. And this khutbatul haja, this was unheard of. This khutbatul haja, this was unheard of by the Arabs up to that point. They never heard the khutbatul haja. Inna alhamdulillah, nahmadu wa nasta'inu wa nastaghfiru wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu ila al-akhir, up to the end. So this was the khutbatul haja. So the Prophet ﷺ says, addressing his family members, O Banu Abdul Muttalib, O Banu Abdul Muttalib, O my fellow tribesmen, that I do not know of any Arab before me who is coming to his people with a message that is better than what I am coming to you with. I'm coming to you with something that will give you your deen and your dunya. Right? I am coming to you with something that will give you your deen and your dunya, this world and the akhirah. I'm coming to you as a messenger from Allah, that if you forsake your idolatry and you turn to Allah alone, then Allah will give you all of the good in this world and Allah will admit you to paradise in the hereafter. This was the message of the Prophet ﷺ to his tribesmen, to his people. And he continued preaching. And this was the first time the message of Islam was openly reached. Right? This was openly reached by their ears, received the message of Islam for the first time. So this was the first time it was open. Now before this, there was only rumors. Right? And as I said, that these rumors had reached Yemen. But Rasulullah ﷺ was not interfering with the status quo, so everything was good. They're not interfering with my business, so why do I need to worry about it, right? So none of these people were approached directly by the Prophet of Allah, so they never batted an eyelid, right? Because the Prophet of Allah was not interfering with them. So now Abu Lahab, he heard this, uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, he became irritated. So he tells the people around that this seems to be an unworthy message. This seems to be an unworthy message, that we have our ways and we have the ways of our forefathers. Who does this young man think he is to oppose the way of our forefathers? Who does he think he is? Okay? So he was the only one in that gathering who was harsh to the Prophet ﷺ. Everyone else, they did not say anything. The only person who was harsh was Abu Lahab. So soon after this, the Prophet ﷺ went public to the whole city. And it comes in Bukhari that the Prophet ﷺ climbed Safa. And this climbing of Safa mountain, this is equivalent that I have an important message to tell you. This is like the news bulletin of those days when you climb Mount Safa, or like town hall event or something like that, something along those lines. The town hall event. You climb Mount Safa, you have something important to say. So the Prophet of Allah, he gives his famous speech, right? So he starts with his CV. He starts with his resume. He starts with his curriculum vitae, right? So what was his curriculum vitae? What do you know of me? What do you know of me? Have you heard any lie from me? If I were to tell you that there is an army attacking, because at that time Safa was quite, it was probably a lot more bigger than it is now. But it erodes because people were constantly going up and down, up to what we have today, where it's quite flat. So, am I that trustworthy that you would take action if I were to say that an army is coming to Makkah? Am I that trustworthy? So at that point, he presented his resume, that what type of person am I to you? Who am I to you? So of course they said, Al-Amin, you are a Sadiq. Ma jarrabna minka al-kadhib. Ma jarrabna minka al-kadhib. That we have never seen you. We have never noticed that you would even tell a lie. That it is unheard of. So then he said, then know, therefore, that I am a warner, I am a nadhir, sent by Allah to proclaim the coming of a severe punishment on the day of Qiyamah. And I will not be able to help you unless you turn to Allah and you leave your idolatry. This was the message. But it is amazing that this was a man, the greatest human being, that he had nothing to present to them except his resume. And what a sterling resume, that no one could point fingers at him and blame him that you did such and such thing, that you committed such and such act, or such and such sin, or you abused such and such person. No one could blame him on that day. What a sterling resume he presented. And this should tell us something, that if we want to present Islam to people, first and foremost, we have to correct ourselves. We have to correct ourselves if we want to present Islam. Because if we present Islam the way we are today, people will look at us and laugh. And they'll say that, what are you talking about? You know, you've done this, you've committed this, you've usurped that person's land, you've lied, you've did. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, living with them for 43, not one time could they level a finger of remonstration and say that you did this and you are guilty of this. What a sterling resume the Prophet of Allah presented to the people of Makkah. So then the Prophet of Allah continues with his da'wah, his preaching, and he says, O Bani Ka'ab bin Lu'ay, save yourselves from the fire of hell, so that on the day of Qiyamah I can help you. O Bani Murrah bin Ka'ab, O Bani Abdul Munaf, O Bani Abdul Muttalib. And he began with the furthest tribes in relation to him. So Banu Ka'ab bin Lu'ay, this was the furthest tribe in relation to the Prophet ﷺ. Then he got closer and closer, right, until he came to Banu Hashim, until he reached Banu Hashim, his own tribe. Because the Quraysh, right, they were all known as Quraysh, but then there were sub-tribes. Okay, so you have Banu Hashim, Banu Abdul Dar, Banu Makhzum. You have these sub-tribes, right? Banu Abdul Dar. So these were all sub-tribes. Then he began mentioning his uncles by name, right? His own family. O Hamza, O Safiya. The Safiya was his aunt. Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. Safiya was his aunt. And he concluded with Fatima, who was the dearest to him. So he said, he added one phrase for Fatima. And he said that, O Fatima, save yourself from hell, save yourself from Jahannam, for I cannot help you. However, I can give you all that I have in this world. As a father, I can do everything for you in this world, but in the hereafter, it is between you and Allah. It is between you and Allah in the hereafter. Whatever you take forth with you, this is going to benefit you in front of Allah. On that day, I will not be able to benefit you. Whatever you have is going to be between you and Allah. He concluded the message, and it was a very emotional and powerful message. It inspired awe in everyone that was there, everyone who was present. Abu Lahab, he stood and he threw sand at the direction of the Prophet ﷺ to show vulgarity. Right? So it's similar to, you know, somebody throwing shoes at someone. Right? You know, remember that President Bush where someone threw shoes at him? No one has done that to Trump. Yeah? No one. So anyway, so then Abu Lahab, he threw sand at him to show he was a vulgar person. He was a very evil person. So he threw sand at the direction of the Prophet ﷺ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verses of Surah Al-Lahab. Tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab ma aghna anhu maluhu wa ma kasab sayasla naran dhata lahab wamra'atuhu hammalat al-hatab fi jidiha hablum min masad. So these verses are recited until the Qiyam. They will be recited to the day of Qiyamah. And all because what? Abu Lahab, he did not want to listen to the message of the Prophet ﷺ. And he was disrespectful to the Prophet ﷺ. This was the first person to oppose the message of Islam. So, and he was not vulgar. See, at home, in the home of the Prophet ﷺ, was he vulgar? No, he wasn't. But he was vulgar in public. Why? Because he wanted to show his bravado. He wanted to show his bravery, his courage. And most people, you know, they're like this. You know, most people, when they're outside, they want to show their bravery, they want to show their bravado. They're like this, and they don't want to give up the status quo. So all prophets, they face this similar opposition. all the prophets they faced similar opposition. And it tells us that the message to family first, this is what Islam commands of us. That when the Yemeni, I mentioned Amr ibn Abasa, when the Prophet of Allah sends him back, he sends him back for a reason. There was wisdom behind it, because the Prophet of Allah knew that this was the opposition that he will have to face. And now the Prophet of Allah, he would preach the message openly. Right? From this point onwards, the Prophet ﷺ preached everywhere. Hujjaj would come, he would preach the message. Visitors to Makkah, he would preach. In the Mina marketplace, he would preach the message. And this is when the public opposition began. Now, how did they oppose? There are many ways that they opposed. There's no chronological order for this. And I'm going to summarize how they opposed. So the first way was that they appealed to the highest authority in Makkah. So the highest authority in Makkah was who? Abu Talib. He was the most respected. Abu Talib was the most respected. And they did have something called Darun Nadwa, right? Something kind of like a senate or parliament, something like that, where the senior members of the tribes, they had a say in the affairs. Because again, lawless society, no government, no form of government. So they said to him that your nephew, and they exaggerate, that your nephew curses our idols, belittles our forefathers. Surely you can't let this happen. You can't let this continue. Abu Talib, he uses qawlan layyinan. He uses some soft words, placates them, and they go their way. And he never took a stand. He remained neutral. He never took a stand for or against the Prophet ﷺ. And he sidetracked the matter, hoping that it would go away. It didn't go away. Right? Now the Hujjaj, they're coming, visitors are coming, they're taking the message of the Prophet ﷺ back to their respective lands. So now they come back to Abu Talib and they increase the pressure. This time they threaten, they bribe, they try to cajole Abu Talib that we can't take this anymore. And this is what Islamophobes do today. Islamophobes, they do the exact same thing, that we can't take Islam anymore, we can't take these Muslims. Why are they breeding so much? Why are they having so many children? Who's stopping you from having children? This is a legitimate cause of concern for many Islamophobes, that why do they have so many kids, right? So they're like, we can't take this anymore, and they fear. Even now, Islamophobes, what do they fear? Sharia law. They don't even know what Sharia law is, but somehow they fear Sharia law. When you ask them what is the definition of Sharia law, I don't know. It means chopping off your hands. Does it mean chopping off your hands? Right. So, this is ridiculous. Sharia law doesn't revolve around chopping off your hands. And even oftentimes, people, they don't know this. Islam is whatever Islam is. Right? This is mentioned in the Quran. But just because you think that Sharia law is something doesn't mean that the religion is going to come and start chopping off people's hands, or start killing people, or start implementing the capital punishment. So these types of statements, they stem from jahal. They stem from ignorance and not knowing what the reality of Islam is. So the Quraysh, what they did was that they made 1 + 1 = 20. Right? So they said that the Prophet curses us, and he maligns us, and he does this with us, and he says that he curses our forefathers. The Prophet of Allah never did anything of the sort. But they made 1 + 1 = 20. That the Prophet ﷺ says that idolatry is foolish. Oh, if idolatry is foolish, then what our forefathers did is also foolish. And because they're foolish, he's cursing them. He's cursing them, he's cursing our idols. So they accused the Prophet ﷺ of cursing the idols, whereas the reality is the Prophet of Allah was far from this. The Prophet of Allah was innocent of cursing and ridiculing their forefathers. And there's a verse in the Quran that says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that don't curse their deities, don't curse their gods, because then they will curse your gods adwan bighayri ilm, out of spite. And they will do this without any knowledge. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, you don't need to curse their gods. And this is this instruction of Allah, this ordinance of Allah, this applies even to us today. That we have no right to curse other people's deities, other people's gods. Now they go to Abu Talib again and they say that, we can't take this anymore. Either you stop him or hand him to us. You stop your nephew or you hand him to us. So Abu Talib, he's never confronted like this by anyone his entire life. He's an elderly man and he's never confronted like this by anyone. So in leadership, if you look at leadership today, outwardly people are powerful, right? In leadership, outwardly people are powerful, but inwardly they're weak. Why? Because every leader needs a core of people who are trustworthy to execute their policies. Is this not the case? Is this not true? So strip away the armies of the tyrants. Strip away everything, right? What do they have? Nothing. You have nothing. So you strip away the armies of tyrants, you strip away their core group, and they're just a regular person. And history, it's a testament to this fact, right? So you have these people who are tyrants, who are in positions of power, right? They're in positions of power because they have a core group who are executing their policies, and this core group, basically, they can do whatever they want, right? Law doesn't apply to this core group. The laws, they don't apply to this core, select, elite group. But once that group is gone, once that core is gone, right, for whatever reason, once that army is stripped away, you have nothing but a regular person. And we see this. And we have seen this, right? With, what's his name? The previous Libyan president. What did he have? Gaddafi, yes. So, no armies, no core group. Ultimately, he was killed. He was killed, ultimately. But up to that point, he was a dictator, whatever he was a dictator. But the fact is that every leader needs a few people, trustworthy people, a core of people, right? So that his policies can be executed. And this is the reality of every person who is a leader. Every person who is in a position of power. So Abu Talib, this time, he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and says, "Oh nephew, my people have come to me with such and such issue. Be merciful to me and yourself." So basically, this is emotional blackmail at its pinnacle. That be merciful to me. I'm an old man. Right? I'm an old person. I'm an elderly person. And now this is Abu Talib. And the Prophet of Allah loves Abu Talib because Abu Talib is a mother and father wrapped in one person. Abu Talib loved the Prophet ﷺ more than his own sons, more than his own kids. So this is Abu Talib coming to the Prophet ﷺ that, "Oh my nephew, oh my dear nephew, that our people have come to us, your people have come to us with this issue. Be merciful to me and be merciful to yourself." The Prophet too, when he hears this from his uncle, he's overwhelmed with emotion. And he utters the famous statement that, oh my dear uncle, if the sun is placed on my right and if the moon is placed on my left, then I can't give up this message. I will not give up this message. Either I'm going to continue or I will die trying. I will die trying. So when Abu Talib saw this persistence, he said, "Do what you will, I will never stop you." After that, Abu Talib never came to the Prophet ﷺ again. He never came to the Prophet again to placate him, to tell him what the people were telling him. He never went to the Rasulullah ﷺ. And he was the only non-Muslim during the boycott. And I'm going to speak about the boycott maybe in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, inshallah. So he was the only Muslim during the boycott that was against the immediate family of the Prophet ﷺ, Banu Hashim. Now they come to Abu Talib again with the entire Quraysh, and they propose that the son of Walid bin Mughira, whose name is Umara bin Walid, they said that we will give you this person, we will give you this man, and you give us Muhammad, you hand him over to us. One son for one son. And we can do with your son whatever we want. So Abu Talib becomes angry. And he says, "What an evil bargain this is. What an evil bargain this is. I take care of your son, fatten him up, and you kill mine. I take your son, I fatten him with my wealth, and you kill mine." So Mut'im bin Adi, he was a non-Muslim. His son accepted Islam, Jubayr bin Mut'im. And he's witnessing all of this. He was the one that gave the suggestion of the Hajar Aswad being placed in its niche, in its position. He was the one who gave the Mut'im bin Adi. Now over here, he looks as if he's the bad guy, but he was a good person. He had some good qualities. So he said that your people did everything they could except their offer, O Abu Talib. So all of Makkah now is united against Abu Talib. All of Makkah is united against Abu Talib. So Mut'im, right, he was the one who gave the suggestion to Abu Talib that, your people, they did everything. Now you have to listen to them, accept whatever they're offering. The Prophet ﷺ, this is a side story. The Prophet ﷺ praises Mut'im. He died a non-Muslim, but he praises Mut'im after the battle of Badr regarding the prisoners that they had captured. It was 70 something prisoners that were captured after the battle of Badr. So he said that if today Mut'im bin Adi was alive and he told me to free them, I would free them. So Mut'im bin Adi, he was a non-Muslim, but he was a noble non-Muslim. He was not an evil person. Why did he praise him? Inshallah, I'm going to come to that when the time comes. So all non-Muslims, the point is all non-Muslims are not the same. There are some noble ones, like Mut'im bin Adi, and there are some non-Muslims who are ignoble, like Abu Lahab and Abu Jahl. So there are many non-Muslims that I'm sure we have interacted with who are good people. Right? They're very good people. And they're very noble, they're a very noble group, and they listen and they want to help. And we see that today as well, that there are many non-Muslims like that. So now all of Makkah versus Abu Talib, right? So they couldn't embark on a coup because this is unheard of. They couldn't say, we're going to remove you because this type of tribalistic society is something that has been passed down. So they didn't want to do something unprecedented. So they couldn't enact a coup or anything along those lines. So Abu Talib, he shows his bravery and he says that this is a plot that you hatched from before. It's a staged event that you want me to give up my son, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for your son. This is a staged event and there is no khair in this. And he says that I will not budge from my position. Basically he's saying this is genuine bravery on the part of Abu Talib. Abu Talib was also a very accomplished poet. He was a very accomplished poet as well. And his poetry is recorded in the books. And he has written poetry about this incident, chastising the Quraysh. Right? Chastising the Quraysh of this entire thing that they came up with against the Prophet ﷺ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed them to back down, so they backed down. Now Abu Talib was a lone figure, yet he backed down an entire tribe. He was a lone figure, entire tribe backed down from Abu Talib. And this was the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So despite this, he never accepted Islam. Abu Talib never accepted Islam. And the Prophet of Allah came to Abu Talib on his deathbed and he said, Ya Am, قُلْ كَلِمَةً أُحَاجُّكَ بِهَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. That, oh my uncle, say one kalima and I will argue for you in the court of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Say one kalima. Abu Talib was about to say it, but one thing was more precious to Abu Talib than his nephew. Who was it? It was his own father, Abdul Muttalib. It was his own father, Abdul Muttalib. That you are the son of Abdul Muttalib. And for them, what was more important than anything? Nasab. Nasab, lineage, was more important to them than anything. Right? So Abu Jahl, when he sees Abu Talib open his mouth to recite the kalima, and he says, are you going to leave the religion of Abdul Muttalib? He didn't say your forefather Abdul Muttalib, because Abdul Muttalib was a legendary figure. Abdul Muttalib was a legendary figure. So Abu Jahl was very measured and very astute in the words that he used. Right? That are you going to leave the religion of your father? Right? So the Prophet ﷺ was, when he passed away, the Prophet of Allah, of course, was emotionally moved. And he announced that I will continuously ask forgiveness for my uncle until I am prevented from doing so. Until I am stopped by Allah. Because the Prophets, they can't take any step without the instruction from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Yunus alayhi salam, whatever he did and whatever happened, right? But he did not seek the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophets, they cannot do anything without the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet of Allah sought permission for Abu Talib until the verses of Surah At-Tawbah were revealed. مَا كَانَ النَّبِيُّ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن يَسْتَغْفِرُوا لِلْمُشْرِكِينَ وَلَوْ كَانُوا أُولِي قُرْبَى. That it doesn't behoove the Nabi, it doesn't behoove the Prophet, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, and those who have believed, that they seek pardon, they seek forgiveness for the mushrikeen, for the polytheists, وَلَوْ كَانُوا أُولِي قُرْبَى, even if they are close family members. And another verse, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. That you cannot guide those that you love, وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. Rather it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who guides who He desires. So the legend of Abu Talib, it just speaks volumes, right? Why? Because Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, when Fatah Makkah took place, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh brings Abu Quhafa, his own father, and his own father's beard is completely white. So he accepts Islam. He holds the Prophet ﷺ's hands, gives bay'ah, accepts Islam. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, he says something profound, right? And he says, Ya Rasulullah, what I would give even my father's hand if I could see the hand of Abu Talib in your hand to accept Islam. Right? This was the legend of Abu Talib. This was the love that the Prophet ﷺ had for his uncle. Now, what is the wisdom as to why Abu Talib didn't accept Islam? Abu Talib had to remain a pagan, because if he had accepted, he would be stripped from his title. That you have accepted Islam and you can no longer be the chief of Banu Hashim. You cannot be the chief. And only after death, the Prophet of Allah had to leave Makkah, because that responsibility of being chief, it went to Abu Lahab, who took charge. And he would have given up the Prophet ﷺ in an instant. But up to that point, he was protected by Abu Talib. And he had to be who he was for the sake of the Prophet ﷺ. And another thing is that no one can dictate to Allah what Allah has decreed. What Allah has decreed. No one can dictate to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who guides. It isn't the Prophet who guides people. The Prophet ﷺ is a mouthpiece of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His responsibility is to make sure that the message of Allah is delivered in its entirety to each and every single person. After which it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who guides. The uncles of the Prophet ﷺ, there were two uncles who were great. Hamza, who is known as Sayyid al-Shuhada, al-Hamza. And there's Abbas, who is a very noble Muslim. But on the flip side, you have Abu Talib and Abu Lahab. Right? Abu Talib, who died a non-Muslim, but a still respectable person. And then you have Abu Lahab. Right? Abu Lahab, who is very evil. Both of these individuals, both of these uncles, never converted. But then you have Hamza, Sayyid al-Shuhada, you have Abbas, who is a very noble person. Abbas radiallahu anh, he in Muslim, it comes, there's a riwayah in Muslim, where he asks the Prophet ﷺ that my brother Abu Talib helped you. Could you not help him in return? The Prophet ﷺ said, my dua for him moved him to the outlying perimeters of Jahannam. So in this way, I am helping him by the dua that I made for him. And this also tells us that our family will not help us on the day of Qiyamah. On the day of Qiyamah, it is only going to be us, our a'mal, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our family is not going to help us in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only our deeds will provide us with salvation in Allah. This is why we do as much as we can, and we do as much as we can in this world, so that our akhirah is more fruitful, it is illuminating, and we have something worthy to present to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all tawfiq and understanding. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullah khairan. Inshallah, someone can give it down.